What I wanted to do is look at 3x3 object lessons. So I'm going to show you very quickly 3 themes and then 3 lessons within each theme. I like numbers for some reason. This is me on my way to school, I think maybe my first day of school, with my Peanuts lunchbox. My brother came out with his cup of coffee to send me off to school. And I think as a creative process, one thinks of what it is to be creative. And for me, it is really leaping off into a void. That's the title of this image by Yves Klein from the 1960s, Leaping into the Void. And I think creativity is very much that. It's going to a place that you don't know. It's trying to imagine a future that doesn't yet exist. And so for me, that's an interesting thing, leaving that safe stoop of my parents' front house and going into a world that you don't understand yet. And I think all of you deal with that every day in your classrooms where students are arriving and learning something new. And I think that in itself is part of the creative process. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my own leap. I thought I'd begin the first theme with my practice, 3 lessons from practice, and then I'll move to lessons from my early years. Our practice is called Overunder. We didn't actually do this skywriting, but it was kind of nice that they happened to set it up according to our logo. And our practice is based on a lot of different kinds of creativity. As Stephen mentioned, we do a lot of different things, from very, very, very small things to very, very, very large things. And that scale and range of types of work, I think, is something that I get a lot of inspiration and interest in. In a way, we call ourselves short attention span architects because we like to do so many different things. So think of all your students that you probably have who are suffering from issues in that regard, and maybe it could be a positive for them in the future. For us, that comes in terms of things like very small-scale objects like books that we design, things at scale like an exhibit. This was an exhibit here at the BSA, an environment for people, something like a house, the scale of a house where you're dealing with a family or other people, to even larger scale works like museums, which are for the public. And I'm keeping these in scale just so you can get a sense, all the way to something like the scale of a 114-hectare district of a city, which is pretty huge. It's about the size of downtown Boston. So imagine going from that tiny little thing which you can't even see to this huge environment. And that's something that we do in our practice all the time, and something which creates some stress as well as some inspiration. And I think it's a really great thing to have that kind of range of possibilities of working. So that's one lesson, I think, from creativity, is that it is a void. It is something you don't know, and you have to understand how to get there, how to move to those places. Second lesson I've had from practice is that my business partners, there are 4 of us, we hail from 4 different continents, and then there's me, the guy from New Jersey. So I have partners from Egypt, one who was born in the UK and grew up in Canada, and another who was born in Colombia and grew up in Switzerland. So the kind of collaboration, I think Ted also referred to this, the collaboration and the internationalism of the creative world, I think, is something to prepare your students for, something to get ready for. That's just a part of the creative world today. And the third lesson for me is about the process. How do you get to the end result? And that's a very important part, I think, of education, is determining how can you set up an appropriate process to lead to results, whether that's a book, an exhibition, a house, a museum, or a city. All of these different scales. We had to really target very different kinds of processes, but shaped by a common interest in design in these. And for me, that was a major lesson of being an architect. So thinking then back to the object lessons where these came from in my mind, back to my school days, I think of 3 places, first off, which were inspiring to me. And maybe that's places are important to me because I'm an architect and interested in them. But the first one is my preschool. Google hasn't actually mapped. It's surprising to me that Google hasn't gotten photos of my preschool yet somehow. But now, unfortunately, it's become a hair salon. I don't know what that says about my early childhood. But the things that I remember very distinctly were the art elements, the fact that we painted fish and then put it on paper. I really distinctly remember that. Maybe that's the smell of it. I don't know. I remember the playground and the kind of possibilities for lots of different things to happen. And I remember my teacher, Mrs. Jackson, who ushered us around the community, especially this is, I think, these are from videos, family videos of Halloween. So they're a little bit mixed, but this is out in the playground. And then I remember one really strange event where we went to visit the building on the other side of the playground one day. And that building was a really great sort of loft space with a lot of great light, and it had all these rolls of blue paper, and it was occupied by two gentlemen with beards and funky glasses. And only when I was in architecture school did I realize later that was an architect's office that I had gone to see. And I had no idea my entire upbringing, but it sort of triggered something later on, that I had been introduced to an architecture practice at that young age. And I remember being fascinated by that space, and maybe somehow that filtered up into my own career. The second space that I fondly remember is not a school space. It's outside school. It's a family space. This was a mill building that my grandfather owned, and my grandfather was a builder. So we used to go here on Saturdays very often, and you would have the smell of wood, the kind of sound of wood being cut, piles of wood to hide behind or move around. And I remember thinking very much that this process of making, this making and putting things together, was really interesting and fascinating to me. So we spent a lot of time there. I still have some of my grandfather's tools that hang around my apartment, and sometimes I use them to do things. But I think more the sensibility influenced me quite a lot. The sensibility of how do you make things, how do you put things together, the importance of materials, honoring materials, all those kinds of ideas come out as a part of the creative process in architecture. And the third space that I remember very well, I think I must have been about 10, was on a family trip for my parents' anniversary going to London. We all got together and went to London, and we left from the TWA terminal at JFK Airport. Just a phenomenal building. I had no idea what architecture really was, but I remember this building so well. And in fact, I just saw it 2 weekends ago for the first time since I was 10 in person, because it's been renovated and it was opened for Open House New York. And what was so fascinating is this is the moment I really remember. I remember going up what we called these vacuum tubes. They reminded us of the tubes that my mom and dad used to use to clean the house with the vacuum, that we were like inside one of those going through. And those objects then connected us to the plane, to another world. And I really remember thinking that object at the end of a design experience was something important to me and something which I was really interested in. So these three things, I think these three lessons made an equation for me. You have the design, that sort of experience in the building. You have the building itself, the process of making, and then you have an end result. And that, to me, has been a bit of the kind of equation that I have as an architect. The last set of themes that I wanted to talk about is process. How do you get to these things? How do you move to these things? And for me, there were a couple of instances from my education that came out strongly in my memory about that as I was thinking about this. The first was making some terrible coat rack that I did in a shop class, probably in 5th grade, I think it was, maybe 6th grade, somewhere around there. And it was shaped like a moose. It still exists in my parents' house. They're away right now, so I didn't get them a chance to take a photograph, but it's in the area where we grew up, still there, still functioning. And I remember that process of making things was really fantastic and really a wonderful thing for me to do as a young person. Again, to be able to create something, to figure out how you're going to create it, what things you need to put it together. The second lesson, I think, was engaging with other people. I think I might have been inspired by the Brady Bunch, but I made a film in 5th grade about Benedict Arnold. And I remember that creative process required me to engage with other people, to pull people into a process of making something, and to put together not just great and brilliant cinematography, but also the act of people performing for me and towards a certain end goal. So this is a pretty cute little film, I have to say. I still have it. Unfortunately, there's no sound. It was, I think it was 8mm. And then the last lesson, I would say, was a concept that I learned in, I think it was 8th grade, in AP U.S. history class. And Mr. LaValle was my teacher. I didn't get to thank either. He died a few years later. He was quite young still, but he passed away. But he was a really influential teacher for me because he inspired me in the subject matter, but he also, in a kind of bigger picture, inspired me to realize that you need a method to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. And I think that was the first time I really understood that not only do you do things, but you actually prepare to do things. You need to kind of figure out what your goals are and then construct a method for yourself to get there. And I think that's hugely influential on the way we perform as creative people. It's not just that one moment of inspiration, as Edison, I think, said. It's that perspiration behind it. It's all that hard work. It's the research. It's the time spent. It's the understanding of the context. That's really important. And Rudhick-Gofak was the mnemonic device that he gave us for getting a high grade on your AP exam. Now, it was a pretty base kind of learning. It wasn't about inspiring you to be the most creative person ever. It was about accomplishing a particular goal and finding a method to get you to that goal. So the method itself gave us a whole set of things that we had to do, a whole set of procedures. And to me, I just became aware from that this was something you had to do for anything. Anything major you wanted to accomplish required a kind of strategy for getting there and a method to get there. So in other words, there's this architectural equation, but in this case, I think making things, engaging people, and creating methods were lessons that were taught to me directly by teachers in school situations from early years through till later years. And those have been incredibly helpful to me as a designer over time. I imagine this is maybe the classroom Teresa was set in a kind of brutal environment. I'm also an educator, but at the college level, so I admire all of you because you prepare my students almost always very well. I agree with David. Architects in particular are terrible writers, but I'm sure other students are better writers than ours. But this is an environment that we try to avoid in architectural education in particular, and maybe think a little bit more about an environment like this, maybe not literally, but the idea that you're working with other people, you're looking outside your classroom for opportunities, and that you're more engaged with the kind of world around you than the classroom experience typically has. That doesn't mean that you have to skydive or go to Europe or something, but it means you need to have a perspective of open-mindedness. And in many respects, we try to do that in architectural education. It was interesting to hear Ted say the same thing in his field. But we're often project-based learning, so we're based on a project that doesn't yet exist. It's not taking knowledge and absorbing it. It's actually producing new knowledge through a project. And it's very often team-oriented, so that you're working with other people. And I think those two goals are maybe the takeaway I would suggest you think more about in your own teaching, is whether, are there opportunities for projects, for things that don't yet exist to be the way that you communicate understanding, and are there opportunities where people can work in a collaborative environment? And Ted, you also mentioned the messiness. That's one of our studios at Wentworth. Definitely the creative process tends to lead towards messy things. Not always, but I think it's really great to see the kind of passion and production that happens with students who are inspired to move forward with their ideas. So those are maybe a few thoughts that I have from a creative experience that I've gone through, and I'm sure there are very many more, but I'm indebted to a lot of teachers who really inspired me in certain ways that I think not only made me a more creative person, but made me somebody who's prepared to see through creativity, and not just be an inspired person, but also one who knows how to follow that inspiration through and to produce something at the end. So I really appreciate all the teachers in this room and all the teachers who've influenced me in that way. Thank you.